This is the Negev Desert, located not far from the Mediterranean Sea in Israel. It spreads over an area of about 5,000 square miles, so in terms of size, Negev is nowhere near a record breaker, especially compared to the vast Sahara or China's Gobi. But that doesn't make things any easier for Israel. The country's total area is 8,100 square miles, meaning more than half of it's just desert. This is a sandy, rocky land with lots of valleys that were probably filled with water once, but are now almost completely dry. Barely an inch of rain falls from the sky in an average year, and in some places there's no rain at all. Add to that the unbearable heat, which in the summer months can stay at a steady 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The only escape from heat stroke is at night. But then you'll need a heater because when it's dark, the temperature drops to around 32 degrees Fahrenheit. All in all, it's tough to survive here, not just for animals, but for people too, even with our ability to adapt. Still, the Israelis are releasing fish here. To be more precise, tons of different kinds of fish and other sea creatures, and they're even underwater plants. Yep, you heard that right, in the middle of the desert. Now let's figure out why they move fish to such a dry place and what Israel's getting out of it. Israel has access to both the Mediterranean and Red Sea, so fish in the desert doesn't exactly sound like a necessity. But out of the 16,500 tons of fish the country caught in 2016, guess how much came from these two seas? Just 6% from the Mediterranean, and as for the Red Sea, its catches are considered insignificant. Israel also has some inland bodies of water, like the legendary Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Kinneret, but only about 2% of the total catch comes from these waters. The rest comes from fishing in deserts and arid areas. It all started back in the 1930s when they brought carp over from Yugoslavia to Israel and managed to breed it in the country's barely suitable land near the Mediterranean Sea. That's when ponds started showing up all over. In Israel, they figured out that sand doesn't help much when it comes to holding water, so every pond in arid regions got a clay base or some other kind of waterproof lining. This makes them reasonably watertight. These days, there are many ponds in Negev. They've been sealed up according to all the water retention rules for ages now, usually measuring about 1,000 square feet with a depth of 5 to 10 feet and producing somewhere between 11,000 and 22,000 pounds of fish per 2.4 acres. Did the Israelis stop there? Not at all. So bigger reservoirs started to appear. Larger area, greater depth, which means they bring in between 22,000 and 44,000 pounds of fish per 2.4 acres annually. The question is, where does all this water actually come from? In Israel, it's officially the most important resource, mainly used to quench people's thirst and support agriculture. For a long time, most of the water came from a mountain aquifer, but now Israelis have realized they're taking too much, 158 billion gallons. The problem is only 95 billion gallons per year can be safely taken. Then desalination went full speed ahead, now supplying half of all drinking water in the country and delivering massive amounts for farming. At the same time, wastewater recycling was expanding. Dozens of treatment plants, along with massive and cutting-edge infrastructure, have made it possible to reclaim 174 billion gallons a year. This covers 50% of the total agricultural water demand and about 25% of the country's overall water needs. Overall, the water situation isn't too critical right now, so there's enough for the fish ponds in the Negev. As we said, there are plenty of fish ponds in the desert, but they don't need a huge amount of this valuable resource. According to the latest info, about 2.6 million gallons are used to keep the fish reservoirs going. However, water conservation in Israel is a part of the culture, something everyone and every company strives for. So even in a situation where there is enough water to grow fish, the countries come up with a way to avoid taking what's used for other needs. Moreover, the solution they've invented not only doesn't require water from the sources used by the rest of Israel, it can easily be directed to agriculture, making it more efficient. But let's take it step by step. In the last century, the Israelis came up with the idea of building fish farms in the desert. Of course, it sounded like total nonsense because of the conditions, lack of water, and everything else. But then after a lot of research, it turned out that at some point it rained heavily in the Negev desert, meaning water seeped underground, and it stayed there. Scientists managed to find water at depths of 49 to 98 feet under the dry areas of the Negev desert, and it's always around 104 degrees Fahrenheit due to the Earth's heat. Then, through trial and error, it was proven that warm water pumped into closed systems is a great environment for some types of fish, including sea bass, tilapia, bream, barramundi, catfish, guppies, clownfish, and others. So closed farms began to appear that simply pump water from underground. For example, here's one of them. It looks like just a box standing somewhere in the south of Israel in the Negev, as you can tell from the surrounding barren landscapes. But in reality, on an 8.6-acre plot, they're actively growing barramundi, a full 2,000 tons a year. The technology used on the farm is exactly the one we've already mentioned. And one might think that farming fish on such a farm in the Negev, especially in such quantities, means using some kind of cheat, like chemicals. But that's not the case. At least that's what the people running the farm claim. Barramundi doesn't contain any hormones, pollutants, or antibiotics. Remember we talked about farms that use heated water and how they also help agriculture? So when fish live in warm water, they release metabolites that are really good for plants. That's why the used water gets pumped to irrigate the farmland in the same desert. Then the plants absorb all these useful metabolites through their roots and clean the water so it can be safely returned to the aquatic creatures. Actually, that's what they do on such farms. It's perfect. A closed loop with almost no waste. Plus, it's a cost-effective solution. First of all, there's no need to take water from Israel's water supply system. Well, technically, they're still in need, but only in very small amounts. The system only needs to be replenished to make up for spraying and evaporation as well as for flushing out waste. Second, there's no need to heat anything up because the water's already warm. Third, there's no need to clean anything since the plants take care of that. You know what's especially good for all of Israel? There's not just one farm, not two, not even 10. There are many, so the country can grow fish without taking up more fertile land, saving resources at the same time. And here's a shrimp. Lots of shrimp. What does this have to do with Israel in the Negev desert? Well, it's exactly here that the shrimp are being farmed. There's only barren land around, but here, exotic sea creatures are farmed with no problem. And it's not the only place where Israelis are doing something like this. In the Negev, they grow them using the same system as with fish. However, here, another feature of the underground geothermal water comes into play. It's slightly salty, which is perfect for sea creatures like shrimp. Shrimp farms in the Negev desert are achieving incredible survival rates, as high as 87%. Why is this so impressive? The thing is, in Indonesia, where conditions for shrimp farming are much more favorable, survival rates on farms only reach 70 to 80%. And that's with access to seawater and a better climate. Shrimp farming in Israel doesn't stop here. Some proactive people and companies are doing it in Israel's tough conditions, initially buying them from other countries. For example, sea creatures are bought in the USA, then they arrive in Israel in regular boxes. After that, tiny fry are placed in bags with water and oxygen and moved to a breeding tank to acclimate to the local waters. In order for them to survive, the water needs to have the right properties. This is where the knowledge of the Israelis comes in, showing how to create the right conditions for creatures that aren't at all suited for growing in the Negev. Acidity, salinity, and temperature. Everything's perfect for keeping shrimp, allowing the creatures to molt and then grow to a weight of 0.003 ounces to 0.007 ounces. And then marine migrants from other countries end up in reservoirs where they live until they reach a weight of 0.8 ounces each. It's worth noting that even in such advanced closed systems, even more advanced technologies are sometimes added. For example, when shrimp are farmed in Israel, they may use biological filters where various bacteria clean the water. The shrimp farming business is actually so complex that even a small farm needs to set up a whole lab to measure dozens of water parameters, including acidity, nitrates, phosphates, and much more. Why? Any mistake can slow down growth or even lead to the shrimp dying. So in the end, these shrimp they raise are sold. For instance, one of the innovative shrimp farmers in Israel says the unique product sells for about 90 shekels per 2 pounds, which currently equals $24.50. It seems like today's video is missing something more sea-related, like seaweed, which is also actively farmed in Israel. This farm belongs to the company Seaweed and is located on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea between Tel Aviv and Haifa. It might seem like the company placed its facility right by the sea to grow seaweed right in the water near the shore and just harvest it right away, but no. Seaweed has set up its seaweed pools on the beach and says that if you get close, you can hear the whisper of jacuzzi-like bubbles. This is how the farm mimics marine conditions, which is important for growing algae. The water doesn't come from underground sources like when farming fish and shrimp in the Negev. In this case, the company uses desalination plants. Water's taken from the Mediterranean Sea, then moved 1.2 miles through a giant pipe to the company's facility. After that, it gets cleaned and moved to the highest point on the farm. Why push the water uphill? So that it can then flow down by gravity into various pools for growing. And here we can think about one of the main problems of desalination. Where does all the salt go after turning salty water into fresh? Usually with desalination plants, after all the processing, you get brine with salt. On average, it's 0.4 gallons of salt for every 0.2 gallons of fresh water produced. And all of this gets dumped back into the ocean, causing habitat destruction because concentrated salt water is no joke. But the Sikura farm takes seawater, uses it to grow seaweed, and then dumps it back into the Mediterranean Sea in the same condition, causing no serious harm to underwater life. By the way, all of this happens without active human involvement, just like with regular seaweed farming in ocean waters. All year round with no restrictions, you only need to press buttons to pump water, turn on the seawater simulation, and then use your hands a little for harvesting. On the farm, they grow ulva seaweed, which is packed with nutrients like vitamins, minerals, dietary fiber, and amino acids. They also farm gracilaria, these reddish, exotic-looking algae that are used to boost the flavor in all sorts of dishes. It's pretty beneficial for Israel, which deals with a lot of food shortages. Out of the 70 tons of algae grown on the farm each year, only 10% is used to make products within the country. The remaining 90% is exported, as the company knows that algae are becoming popular all around the world right now. This helps them make good money to keep their business going. The farm is far from the Negev desert, but the technology could, in theory, be adapted for the desert. And since there isn't much land in Israel, soon there might be a desire to move algae to where there's plenty of unused space, right into the desert. The only problem is that the pipes will have to be laid over a long distance, but we already know that in Israel this isn't anything out of the ordinary, given the water supply network they've already established there. Now we're moving almost to the very south of Israel. Of course, there's the Negev desert here too. We're getting closer to Keturah Kibbutz, located about 31 miles from the resort town of Eilat. Here you can see something that looks like solar panels or another similar system, but no, it's seaweed. They grow seaweed here too. If you take a closer look, you'll find that the area is filled with countless tubes emitting a bright red or green glow, which doesn't really make you think of seaweed. Transparent tubes filled with water contain millions of flakes of microalgae called Hemitococcus pluvialis. To keep it simple, let's just call them red seaweed. The whole system here is a closed one. That's its key feature compared to ponds where seaweed is usually grown. That's true if we're talking about growing on land. Of course, usually the whole process happens in water. So this closed system is the perfect solution to save the precious red algae from pollution and metal buildup. The creators of the farm also picked the perfect spot. Somewhere between the Dead and Red Seas is an area that gets a huge amount of sunlight all year round and isn't polluted by any factories, because no one but resourceful farmers would dare do such a thing. Yes, the seaweed growing in the tubes is truly a treasure. Their flakes contain the highest concentration of astaxanthin found in nature, about 40,000 parts per million. To give you an idea of how much that is, salmon has only about 5 to 15 parts of astaxanthin per million. This very astaxanthin can be used for feeding salmon, lobsters, and other crustaceans. If you've ever wondered why these creatures have that bright pinkish tint, it's exactly because of astaxanthin. So somewhere in the corner of the Negev, there's a farm that becomes a source of food for the fish and shellfish being raised both in Israel and around the world. Sounds pretty cool. The creators of the farm say that the world hasn't accepted astaxanthin yet, but that's just yet. It'll take time before science and the public fully appreciate the product made from red algae. Right now, about 97% of this element is produced synthetically. It's on petrochemical plants that you'll find what's needed to produce astaxanthin. As you can see, in today's world, producing anything from oil-based products has a negative reputation, so the Red Seaweed Farm promises to become the main supplier of natural products to the global market. The farm's creators also say that the synthetic version can be used as fish feed, but of course it won't do any good for human health. So here's another reason why the Israeli farm is going to be popular with consumers worldwide, or at least for those who decide to borrow the technology to open a similar facility. It seems that with its knowledge of how to grow aquatic animals or plants, Israel could even become a source of technology for exploring other planets. And it's actually happening. These are shots from the Negev Desert Ramon crater. The country's already running various tests simulating Martian conditions, so it looks like they're testing everything at once in the Negev, a desert for all kinds of things.